my father and his sister Ruth. They were both Doctor of Law. My grandfather, he could have been a law professor in Germany if he would be baptized. And he said no. So he became the first Jewish solicitor in Aachen. Ruth, she was a real bright spark. She came to England. She improved her English and she did a pitman's course. He worked for a firm that tried to bring people to Israel. If people were prepared to emigrate to Palestine, the Nazis would allow you to take out your fortune. There were lots of countries which they discussed emigrating to. It needed a push, and the push was the burning down of the synagogues in Kristallnacht. They came to take my father to concentration camp. My grandfather was Dr. Francken, and my father was Dr. Francken. So the maid told the Nazi that Dr. Francken died in 1932. So the Nazi went away and my father didn't have to go to concentration camp. The British government said that they would take 70,000 refugees, and my family were 3 of those refugees. He arrived in England. His law degrees didn't help him, so he joined a textile firm as their company secretary. My mother was called Liesel Heim, and she came from Vienna. They met at a concert. They liked each other. Then my father was interned on the Isle of Man, and there was correspondence between them. The policeman who came to pick him up said, "We're taking you for a lovely holiday on the Isle of Man." But some of the refugees who'd had much worse experiences than my father committed suicide because they thought, here we go again. Anyway, my father had a wonderful time on the Isle of Man. He was a house father, but my father wanted to fight Hitler. And so at the first opportunity, he first tried to join the army while he was on the Isle of Man, but they wouldn't allow him. The only part of the army that he was allowed to join was the Pioneer Corps. So in 1941, he joined. He'd been about 8 months on the Isle of Man. He then went to the Pioneer Corps, where he was in Catterick Camp, which is in Yorkshire, and they married in 1941 in Richmond, Yorkshire. And they had their honeymoon of 2 days at a pub, which was the officers' mess. And then he was moved to Wales, and he built roads in Wales. He describes his life at Senny Bridge, where he has to sweep out the officers' mess and wash up the dishes and fill lorries with sacks of coal, also feed the pigs. Father's sister, Ruth, I think all the stress that she had brought on this ovarian cancer, and she died in 1941 at the age of 34. My sister was born in 1943. They lived in West Hampstead in Cleeve Road. This letter was written on the 11th of July 1943 He's writing to my mother. Mein Liebes, ich war froh, dass ich dir... I am so pleased that I can give you my very excellent news about the interview. I have no idea what the work will entail. I only know that I must be on the 23rd of July at 11 a.m. at the War Office in London to apply for a job. This would be a big uplift. I only remember what I've written down and what he wrote. Friday the 23rd of July 1943 was the date of the MI5 interview. What did Hans tell me about it? I was interviewed by MI5. They asked me many questions. I told the truth. The only way to combat Hitler was to support the Communist Party in Germany. At the end of the interview, I no longer knew what was up or down. I knew from friends that out of 14 people, only 3 were called back. 4th of August 1943, so I had the hope that I would get into a better position through the transfer to the Intelligence Corps, but I don't believe it anymore and reproach myself for the hopeless condition that I am in at present. If nothing comes of the interview in a few days, that would mean that for years to come I would view myself as a failed person. Basically, how can you fight Hitler sweeping the officers' mess? My father said that on day one in the Intelligence Corps, one is made a sergeant. He was a corporal before that, and Hans was very proud of this promotion. My father wrote to the organisers of the 1992 invitation of the Jews of Aachen to their hometown. I was in the Intelligence Corps from 1943 until 1945. I was in a section which concerned itself with German prisoners of war. Whilst dealing with this, I found about the atrocities on the Eastern Front long before the general public. As examples, a Wehrmacht soldier who witnessed a mass murder of Jewish men, women and children, and an officer in the Luftwaffe who told of flying over a concentration camp. My father never met the prisoners who he interviewed. He only heard voices. He was in 12 hours on and 12 hours off in Latimer House, in the basement, with a gramophone record, and if the airman and the soldier said anything important, then he recorded it on a gramophone record. I was born after the war, 13th of June 1945. Every Sunday we were invited for high tea at my grandmother in 10 Belsize Park. During those walks, I was a very dunchy little boy, constantly asked questions. And my father liked talking about these things, so he told me all the stories as we walked along. They asked my father to go to Nuremberg. He was a lawyer, but he had these 2 small children. He didn't know how he could do it. He didn't know how long Nuremberg would last. He didn't bear any grudges. He moved to the London cage. They actually had prisoners of war, and my father would have interviewed them. And so he wasn't discharged until the 31st of December 1945. This is from my Hans's war records. This sergeant has been doing work of great secrecy and has shown all those qualities of tact and discretion which that were required. He has a wide experience in handling difficult people and situations and possesses an agreeable personality. He speaks fluent French and German and seems well suited for a position of trust and responsibility. Father went back into the textile trade, and he was always company secretary. Now in 1956, Konrad Adenauer, the Chancellor of Germany, he gave pensions to the SS, which he shouldn't have done, and he did Wiedergutmachung to the Jews. In 1956, I was at my grammar school, and my father came up to my room and said, "John, I've been offered my job back in Aachen at the law courts. I could start again. I wouldn't have to work in the rag trade." And I said, "Absolutely not. I can't speak a word of German." It would have been dreadful for me. I can't speak a word of German. After what has happened in the war, I don't want to go back, and nor did my mother want to go back. So my father was pensioned off. The pension was backdated to 1933 when he lost his job. Well, my father was a lovely man, and he was a very forgiving man, and he always liked to think the best of people. He lived to 91. I'm very proud of him, very proud of him.